Aisha Cousins, an artist. I write performance art scores, which are do-it-yourself instructions for live art projects. And the projects that I do are usually designed to get Black folks from different cultural backgrounds to come together to explore a sociological shift or change in society that's affecting Black folks in a way where people from different backgrounds might be experiencing it in different ways, but by working on this project together, they can learn to see it from each other's perspective. And hopefully, by sharing the documentation of these projects with people who don't feel like they relate to them directly, that we all kind of learn a little more about the nuances of Blackness.
Excellent. And what are perhaps some of the nuances of Blackness with regard to the Afro-Latino communities?
So when we started doing this project, it's part of a series I'm doing about important, but I think sort of underdocumented aspects of Black life during this period where we have our first Black president in the United States. And so the idea of doing an alternative census came up in response to the 2010 census, which only had one line for Black folks. It was Black, African American, Negro, and it was like one box. So like if your family was from like Ghana or Jamaica, or like you'd been in the US in slavery, it was just like one box. Which really, if you think about like all the information they gathered, it makes that information very cloudy, So like if you say that there's a bunch of Black people now who have moved to Colorado, which ones? Is it like Sudanese immigrants? Is it like people who've been in the US in slavery? It kind of like skews really your picture of what's happening. And so I was interested in filling in that missing information, I guess, and also just getting the public to think about the way that the U.S. sort of like overgeneralizes, the way that it thinks about Black folks. But in the midst of doing that, I realized that Black folks amongst ourselves often are also not thinking critically about how diverse the Black population is in the U.S. and how much more and more diverse it's becoming, and so our language has not really kept up with that. And you find a lot of people using terms that they use them inconsistently within their own language, and then when they're talking to other people, they kind of have to like renegotiate within every conversation what these terms mean. And so if you think about like 50 years from now, so somebody's reading a news article, right? And someone says, oh, this happened to this Black person or this African American person. There's no clear, consistent way in which we're using that language. So 50 years from now, the person wouldn't know like exactly what you're talking about, like exactly which population you're talking about or what you're describing even, It could be like an incident where like a person got shot because they were Jamaican. It could be an incident where it was like, you just don't know because that information is not clear now. So we wanted to get other Black folks to think about that. And then in going around to different festivals, it was pointed out to us that the census also did a terrible job of thinking about Afro-Latinos. And also that again, like amongst Black folks, there's sort of that weird like it's bizarre, but like the idea that like language somehow makes us like not like separate that way, which is really utterly, it doesn't work that way with other languages, which is interesting. Like I don't think people feel that divide in the same way with like say French. You know what I mean? Like nobody's like, they speak French, those Senegalese people. And like no, but it's like the psychological sense of like I think difference that sometimes people create, when they make up these like imaginary boxes that they put people in. I think it's a more it's a stronger line for some reason when it comes to the Spanish language, which is interesting. And so, but it was pointed out to us that the Afro-Latino Forum obviously has been doing a lot of work around the way that the census didn't really deal appropriately with trying to gather that information about Afro-Latinos in the U.S. And so we were like, okay, cool. So we definitely would want this project to try to get responses from a percentage of, we would like the number of people who identify as Afro-Latino that respond to the Soulville Census to be proportionate to the number of people in the United States who identify as Afro-Latino, or the percentage of Black people in the United States who identify as Afro-Latino, so that our census project again is a nice example of how much information the U.S. Census has missed.
The slogan or the main phrase of the festival this year is Affirm, Educate, Celebrate. So in what way does the census work that you're doing support those one or all of those three verbs?
I think it definitely encourages people to, like, it affirms people's the way in which we all see ourselves, you know, and affirms the idea that, like, even if the person who's, like, making boxes puts you in the wrong box, you can always take yourself out of that box and put yourself right where you belong. Like, we've made up our own census. And it's actually, I write performance art scores, so because they're instructions, they're sort of like, you know, almost like jazz compositions, you know, where it's like a person plays it, but hopefully somebody else will play it in a different way, you know, so they're written for other people to do. I do them as examples, you know, for other people to see. Like, I've done this one 3 different ways. I've done it as a mural, I've done it as like a thing where people raise their hands and answer it, and then this is the biggest one yet, where we like literally have census takers and we're going around and doing it that way. But yeah, it's a project where, like, you know, the instructions for it are literally just make a census that gathers the data that the 2010 US Census missed. So I think it kind of affirms people's ability to recreate, you know, those definitions and make boxes that fit who they are, and that is something you totally have the power to do. Don't let anybody make you feel like you can't. I think it's been educational, I mean, for us definitely in doing the census, and I think it's interesting talking to people as they do the census. It's like 4 pages long, and part of it is like it's just like straight kind of like, how do you feel about the 2010 census? And then like part of it is like terms that you call yourself. The terms keep growing in response to like things people tell us. But it's really interesting, like, also because we're not literally just gathering census data. It's called the Soulville Census, so that when people learn about it, they're referencing the idea of the 2010 census and how, you know, what that was like. But really what we're doing is asking people questions that are part gathering information and part getting them to think about the terms that they use and the logic behind it. So like this set of questions, it's actually like, what do you call yourself? And then it's like, what would you call Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, their children? And then we also use the example of a character from the movie 12 Years a Slave. It's a character who's presumably first generation in the United States. She's a woman who's like been kidnapped from an African country. You don't know which one. She's working on a plantation. Like, which terms would you use to describe her? Which terms would you use to describe the actress who played her, who's Kenyan? And then after people answer those questions, we get them to go back through the grid of possible answers, you know? It's really just based on like the language people use, but we try to get them to go through this grid and say, okay, like, so if you put down, for instance, like African for Barack Obama, right? And then maybe you put down like Kenyan. If you didn't put it down for his kids, like, why is that? Because they're, you know, like, those are his kids, you know, and just like asking people what their logic is. And then people will sometimes tell us what their logic is, which is really interesting, or sometimes they go, oh, you think their logic? So it's interesting, it's kind of like a two-way thing. There are several questions like that where we're actually like kind of pushing people to dig deeper about their logic and be more clear about it. I feel like the festival is making me celebrate, which is great. I thank the festival for that, because usually I'm not, like, I'm like in the house making census forms.